Welcome to the Revenge Chronicles channel. Enjoy your viewing pleasure. I guess you never really know when life is gonna take a sledgehammer to your chest. For me, it happened the night I came back home after closing the biggest deal of my life. My name's Max. I'm 48, married, or I thought I was married, to Camila for almost 2 decades. Together we built what should have been a pretty great life. I co-owned a pharmaceutical company with my siblings, and after years of grinding we finally sealed a deal to sell it. It wasn't just a big payday, it was the payday. Enough to secure our future, to make all the sacrifices worth it. I was even thinking about taking Camila to Greece like we'd always talked about, maybe finally getting her that sapphire ring she'd been hinting at for years. But when I pulled into my driveway late that night, everything started to feel off. There was this gold Mercedes parked outside. At first I thought maybe one of Camila's friends came by. But the thing is, she didn't mention anything when we talked earlier. And who drops by unannounced at midnight, especially driving something that fancy? My gut twisted. You know that feeling? Like your body knows before your brain catches up. I parked on the street, killed the engine, and just sat there for a moment. The house was dark except for a faint glow upstairs. My heart was pounding, but I told myself I was being stupid. Maybe she forgot to tell me something. Maybe anything really. Still, I couldn't shake it. I got out of the car and quietly let myself in. The place was silent, but not in the comforting way it usually was. It felt hollow. Wrong. I didn't even bother turning on the lights as I made my way upstairs. Every step I took felt heavier, like my body was trying to stop me from moving forward. And then I opened our bedroom door. There she was. Camila. My wife. Naked. Wrapped around some stranger like they'd been doing this for years. The guy was sound asleep, his face half buried in my pillow. My pillow. For a moment I just stood there. I couldn't even breathe. It felt like the walls of the room were closing in on me, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might wake them up. Camila didn't even stir. She was snoring softly, her arm draped over his chest like he was her everything. Like I hadn't just spent months pouring every ounce of energy I had into making a better life for us. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. It could have been seconds or hours. My world had just stopped. And then something clicked. I didn't yell, didn't scream. I didn't want to wake them up. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Everything. The two of them tangled in bed, the pile of clothes on the chair, the guy's wallet that he'd so thoughtfully left out. Evidence. Cold, hard evidence. I was shaking, but I kept going. After I got what I needed, I stepped back into the hallway, closing the door quietly behind me. I didn't trust myself to stay there any longer. Whatever came next, I knew I had to keep my head on straight. That I don't even remember walking back downstairs. My legs carried me, but my mind stayed upstairs, replaying the scene over and over like some cruel highlight reel. I ended up in the kitchen, staring at the stainless steel fridge Camila picked out last year. She'd been so excited about it, saying it was the perfect touch for her dream kitchen. Funny how little things like that stick in your brain when your world's falling apart. I sat down at the table, gripping my phone like it was a lifeline. The photos stared back at me, proof that this wasn't just some nightmare I'd wake up from. My hands were shaking, my stomach in knots. I felt a dozen things all at once. Anger, humiliation, sadness, but mostly disbelief. Oh, what? I had to think. Acting out of anger wasn't going to fix anything, and I sure as hell wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of catching me breaking down. So, I did what I'd always done when faced with a problem. I made a plan. First, I needed more information. I wanted to know exactly who this guy was and how long this had been going on. I didn't recognize him. Camila had never mentioned anyone driving a flashy car like that, and I didn't think she'd suddenly made new friends at her job. Her lies were about to unravel, and I was going to be the one pulling the thread. I picked up the wallet from the pile of clothes I'd grabbed earlier. Inside was his driver's license. Eric Donovan? No ring on his finger, so I guessed he wasn't married, not that it made this any better. He looked mid-30s, clean-shaven, with one of those fake movie star smiles. The kind of guy who probably thought he was too good for anyone's rules. I thumbed through the rest of his wallet. Credit cards, a business card for some real estate agency, a folded-up receipt from a bar across town. Cute. My hands were still shaking, but I couldn't stop. I opened his phone. No password. Amateur. His call log was full of late-night conversations with Camila, and their texts. Well, let's just say they made my stomach turn. All those working late excuses she'd been feeding me? Was. I screenshotted everything. Photos, messages, call history. If this thing was going to blow up, I needed every bit of ammo I could get. By the time I looked up, the first streaks of dawn were peeking through the blinds. I'd spent hours sitting there, alone in the dark, piecing together the extent of their betrayal. Camila hadn't come downstairs, which meant she was probably still tangled up with Eric. The thought made me grip the table so hard my knuckles went white. I thought about confronting them, barging into that bedroom and tearing into them both. But what would that accomplish? They didn't deserve my anger, not yet. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the affair. This was about the life we'd built together, the years I'd invested, the sacrifices I'd made. I wasn't going to let them destroy it without a fight. I stood up, my mind racing. If Camila thought she could just play me for a fool, she had no idea who she was dealing with. First, I was going to lawyer up. Then, well, I had a few ideas. But one thing was certain. By the time this was over, Camila and Eric would wish they'd never crossed me. The house was eerily quiet as the sun fully rose. I busied myself with coffee, the mechanical act of brewing it grounding me for a moment. The smell filled the kitchen, but my appetite was long gone. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to answer yet. I heard the floor creak above me. Someone was moving around. My jaw clenched, but I stayed put. I wasn't ready to face her. Not yet. A few minutes later, soft footsteps patted down the stairs. Camila appeared in the doorway, dressed in the same silk robe I'd bought her for our 10th anniversary. She gave me a sleepy smile like everything was fine, like she hadn't spent the night with another man under my roof. "Good morning," she said, her voice light. She had that fake sweetness, the kind she used whenever she wanted to brush something under the rug. "I didn't hear you come in last night. How was your trip?" For a second, I just stared at her, the audacity of her act rendering me speechless. She walked over to the counter, pouring herself a cup of coffee like it was any normal day. I could see a faint blush on her neck, a mark that wasn't from me. My grip tightened around my mug. "Long?" I said flatly, my voice colder than I intended. "How about you? Late night?" She froze for a split second, just long enough for me to catch it. "Oh, you know," she said, laughing nervously. "I stayed up watching one of those trashy reality shows. I think I fell asleep on the couch for a while." My knuckles ached from how hard I was holding the mug. "Huh, that's funny. I didn't see you on the couch when I came in." Her eyes flicked to me, then quickly away. "Well, I must have gone up to bed after that. You know how I am when I'm tired." She wasn't even good at lying anymore. Made me sick. How many times had she looked me in the eyes and fed me these stories? I wanted to call her out right there, but I bit my tongue. Let her dig herself deeper. I wasn't ready to tip my hand yet. "What's on your agenda today?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Oh, just the usual," she said, sipping her coffee. "Laundry, groceries, maybe some yoga later." She smiled like that explained everything. "What? Did you have something in mind?" I shook my head, trying to mask my disgust. "Nope. Just curious." She breezed out of the kitchen a few minutes later, humming to herself as if nothing was wrong. I stayed at the table, staring into my coffee and trying to steady my breathing. How could she be so carefree? So brazen? The door upstairs creaked again. I knew who it was before I even saw him. Eric. He came down the stairs in last night's clothes, his hair a mess. When he spotted me in the kitchen, he froze, his face paling as if he'd seen a ghost. I guess he didn't expect to run into the husband he'd just betrayed. "Morning," I said, my voice steady but ice cold. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Eric opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it again. His eyes darted toward the front door. Morning," he finally stammered, avoiding eye contact. I should probably get going." I didn't move. Didn't say a word. I just let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. Finally, he bolted for the door, fumbling with his keys as he practically sprinted to his car. The gold Mercedes roared to life, and just like that, he was gone. But his exit didn't feel like the end. No, it was just the beginning. I grabbed my phone and opened the photos I'd taken the night before, scrolling through them with a grim sense of satisfaction. I had everything I needed. Now it was time to act. First step? A lawyer. By the time this was over, neither Camila nor her lover would be humming any happy tunes. That much I could promise, that I spent the morning gathering my thoughts, trying to figure out my next move. The first call I made was to a divorce attorney a friend had recommended years ago. At the time, it was just one of those you never know things, a name scribbled on a notepad and shoved into a drawer. Now it felt like the most important call of my life. The attorney, Karen Hill, picked up on the second ring. Her voice was sharp and professional, but not unkind. I gave her the bare bones of the situation: wife of nearly 20 years, infidelity, and a whole mess of emotions I was barely holding together. "I see," she said, her tone calm and steady, which I appreciated. "Max, the first thing we need to do is meet. Bring everything you've got: financial documents, records, Any evidence of the affair? From what you're saying, you've already started gathering proof. I have photos, I said, my voice tight. Text too. And the guy's information. Good, Karen said firmly. The more we have, the better. Does she know you're aware of the affair? Not yet, I admitted. I've been playing it cool. That's smart, she said. The element of surprise is often your biggest advantage in these situations. Let's set up a meeting. By noon, I was sitting in Karen's office, a tidy, unassuming space lined with bookshelves and legal degrees. I handed over my phone, flipping through the photos and screenshots. She nodded as she looked through them, her expression never changing. This is solid evidence, she said, setting the phone down. Infidelity is grounds for divorce in our state, and this will work in your favor, especially if there's significant marital property at stake. There is, I said, my jaw tightening. We just sold the company. The money hasn't even hit the accounts yet. Karen leaned forward, her sharp eyes meeting mine. Max, that makes this even more urgent. If that money is considered marital property, we need to act before she can move or hide any assets. Are your accounts joint? Some, I said. The deal money is supposed to go into a shared account, but I still have my personal one. Good, she said, jotting something down. We'll want to put a freeze on the joint accounts as soon as we file. Have you decided what you want out of this divorce? I hesitated. It was still so fresh, the thought of untangling 2 decades of marriage overwhelming. I want what's fair, I said finally. I'm not looking to ruin her, but I'm not letting her take what I've worked for. Karen nodded, her pen tapping the desk. Understandable. And the house? She can have it, I said. It's just bricks and mortar to me now. What about alimony? She asked. Does she work? She has a part-time job, but she doesn't really need it, I said bitterly. She spends more than she makes. Honestly, I'd rather not pay her a dime after what she's done. Karen smiled faintly. We'll push for that. If we can prove she's been unfaithful, it might help. But don't get too attached to the idea. It's not always a guarantee. She paused, her expression softening. Max, I know this is hard. But it sounds like you're handling this well, keeping your head and planning your next steps. That's the best thing you can do right now. By the time I left her office, I felt a little more in control. The rage and heartbreak were still there, but at least now I had a roadmap. Karen promised to file the paperwork immediately, and she'd start the process of freezing the accounts. It was going to be a fight, but I was ready. On the drive home, I thought about how Camila would react when she realized what was happening. Would she try to lie her way out? Beg for forgiveness? Or would she double down, refusing to take responsibility for anything? I didn't know, but one thing was clear. The days of me sitting quietly in the background were over. That evening, Camila was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I watched her for a moment, wondering if she had any idea the storm that was about to hit. Hey Max, she said without looking up. Everything okay? Perfect, I said, forcing a smile. Why wouldn't it be? Her smile faltered just for a second. No reason. You just seem a little tense. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You could say that. She laughed nervously. Well, you know what they say. A little yoga fixes everything. My stomach turned. She had no idea what was coming. But soon she would. I didn't say much that night. Camila seemed content scrolling through her phone, acting like everything was normal. I watched her, feeling the weight of what I knew. It was surreal, sitting across from someone who had no clue their world was about to collapse. You're quiet, she said, glancing up. Something on your mind? I shook my head. Just tired from the trip. She smiled, oblivious. You work too hard, Max. You need to relax more. Relax. The word felt like a joke. But I just nodded and went upstairs. I needed the rest, not for relaxation but for what was coming next. The next morning I got up early. Camila was still in bed, so I went into my office and started making calls. Karen had already filed the divorce papers and set the account freezes in motion. Everything was lining up. Before I left the house, I checked my phone again. Photos, texts, evidence, all neatly saved. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Timing was everything. I wanted her to see the paperwork before I said a word. Let her try to explain her way out of that. As I drove away, the image of her smiling at me last night stuck in my mind. That smile wouldn't last much longer. It only took a couple of days. Camila had no idea what was coming, and I made sure to act as normal as I could. We barely talked, just the usual small stuff about groceries or what to make for dinner. She didn't suspect a thing. Then the papers were served. I wasn't there when it happened. I made sure to be out of the house, grabbing a coffee and taking a walk. When my phone buzzed, it was Karen. She's been served, was all the text said. I came home an hour later, the tension thick in the air. Camila was sitting at the kitchen table, the divorce papers spread out in front of her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked up as soon as I walked in. "Max, what is this?" Her voice cracked. I set my keys down calmly. "What does it look like?" Her hands trembled as she held up the papers. "You're divorcing me? Just like that? Why?" I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "You know why?" She shook her head, tears spilling over. "No, I don't understand. What did I do?" I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photos of her and Eric, the text, the call logs. Then I placed it on the table in front of her. Her face went white. She didn't even pick it up. "I can explain." I cut her off, my voice steady. "Don't bother. I've heard enough lies. The papers are there. Read them carefully." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time, Camila seemed genuinely speechless. I left her sitting there, the evidence and the truth laid bare. It was her turn to figure out what came next. I stayed in my office, giving Camila space, or maybe giving myself a break from the sight of her unraveling. I could hear her pacing in the kitchen, her muffled sobs cutting through the silence. Part of me wanted to feel bad for her, but the photos on my phone reminded me why I couldn't. Finally, there was a knock at the door. She didn't wait for me to answer, stepping in with the papers clutched in her hand. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were sharp. "Max, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "Talk about what?" I asked, not looking up from my desk. "You blindsided me with this," she snapped, slapping the papers onto the desk. "You don't think I deserve a chance to explain?" I leaned back, meeting her gaze. "Explain what, Camila? How you brought another man into our bed. How you lied to my face over and over." "It's not what you think," she blurted, desperation seeping into her tone. "Eric, he's just a friend. I made a mistake, but it wasn't serious." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Not serious? You've been sneaking around for God knows how long, and you're telling me it's nothing?" Her face crumpled, but she didn't back down. "I never stopped loving you, Max. It was just, it happened and I didn't know how to fix it. I was scared." "Scared?" My voice rose, the anger bubbling up. "You weren't scared when you let him into our house. You weren't scared when you lied to me every damn day." She flinched, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You did." She stood there for a moment, her chest heaving, but I was done. Whatever excuses she had, I didn't want to hear them. "Max, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't throw everything away. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I stood, the chair scraping against the floor. "You already threw it away, Camila. I'm just cleaning up the mess." Without another word, I walked past her, leaving her standing in the doorway, clutching the papers like they could somehow save her. The next few days were a blur of tension. Camila swung between crying and trying to talk to me, but I shut her down every time. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. I kept my distance, focusing on the divorce process and sorting through what came next. Then the family started calling. It started with my sister, Anna. She'd heard through the grapevine that something was wrong. "Max, what's going on?" she asked, her tone concerned. "Camila called me. She was hysterical." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "I'm divorcing her." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Divorcing her? What happened?" "She cheated on me," I said flatly. "I caught her in our bed with someone else." Anna gasped. "Oh my God, Max, I don't even know what to say." "Nothing to say," I replied. "It is what it is." "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "Do you need anything? Someone to talk to?" "No, I'm handling it," I assured her. "But thanks." The next call came from Camila's mother. I wasn't expecting it, but I answered anyway. "Max, honey," she began, her voice soft and pleading. "Camila told me about the divorce. Is there any chance you two can work this out?" "She's devastated." I gritted my teeth. "She's devastated? Did she tell you why we're divorcing?" "She mentioned some mistakes," her mother said carefully. "But Max, people make mistakes. You've been married so long, surely this isn't worth throwing everything away." "She didn't make a mistake," I said sharply. "She made a series of decisions that destroyed our marriage. I'm not throwing anything away." "She did that?" Her mother sighed. "I just don't want to see you both hurt like this." "And what about the family? The holidays?" "That's not my problem anymore," I said firmly. "If she cared about the family, she wouldn't have done this." The line went quiet, and I hung up before the conversation could drag on. By the time I was done with those calls, I was more drained than ever. Everyone had their opinions, but none of them had been in my shoes. None of them had walked into their home to find everything they thought they knew shattered. I wasn't going to let anyone guilt me into staying in a broken marriage. I had my boundaries and I wasn't budging. Camila made her choices. Now I was making mine. By the end of the week, Camila's tone shifted from defensive to desperate. She started trying harder, cooking my favorite meals, cleaning the house top to bottom, even dressing up like she used to when we were first dating. None of it moved me. One evening, she cornered me in the living room as I flipped through channels. "Max, can we please just talk? I know you're angry, but we need to figure this out." I kept my eyes on the TV. "There's nothing to figure out. You killed this marriage the moment you decided to bring him into our bed." She knelt beside me, her hands clutching mine. "I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, Max, don't throw us away." I pulled my hands free, standing up. "Camila, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference." Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. Later that night, I found her in the kitchen with a glass of wine, staring out the window. She didn't notice me until I spoke. "Why him, Camila?" I asked. "Of all the people, why Eric?" She flinched, setting her glass down. "It wasn't. I didn't mean for it to happen. He was just there." "Just there?" I repeated bitterly. "That's all it takes for you to throw away 20 years of marriage?" She turned to face me, tears in her eyes. "I felt invisible, Max. You were always working, always focused on everything but me. Eric noticed me." I laughed darkly, shaking my head. "So your solution was to crawl into bed with him? To betray me in the worst way possible?" Her tears spilled over as she whispered, "I wasn't thinking. I was lonely." "Spare me the excuses," I snapped. "You could have talked to me. You could have told me how you felt. But instead you chose to destroy everything." She didn't reply, just stood there sobbing softly. I left the room, my resolve hardening even more. Lonely or not, she had made her choice. Now I was making mine. The next morning, just as I thought the storm had hit its peak, another wave rolled in. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Max," the voice said, hesitant but unmistakable. "Eric, what do you want?" I growled, already gripping the phone tighter than I should have. "Look, man, I didn't mean for things to get this far," he started. "I didn't know she hadn't told you about us." I barked a humorless laugh. "Us? There is no us. There's my wife, who betrayed me, and you, the coward who helped her." He stammered, trying to explain. "It wasn't like that. I care about Camila, but I never wanted to hurt you. I swear." "You didn't just hurt me," I snapped. "You blew up my entire life. So don't act like this was some accident." Eric sighed, his tone shifting to something almost pleading. "Look, I just wanted to apologize. I know I crossed a line." I cut him off. "Apology not accepted. Stay the hell out of my life." And hers. Before he could respond, I hung up, my heart pounding. That afternoon, I came home to find Camila sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. When she looked up, I could see she'd been crying again. "What now?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Eric called me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. My jaw tightened. "What did he say?" "He thinks I should leave before this gets worse. That maybe it'd be easier if I just went to stay with my mom for a while." "Maybe he's finally right about something," I said coldly. Her eyes widened, fresh tears spilling over. "You'd really just let me go?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "You already left, Camila. The moment you chose him, you left this marriage." She didn't argue, just nodded quietly. "I'll pack some things." As I watched her disappear upstairs, I felt nothing. No relief, no sadness, no anger. Just emptiness. This wasn't how I imagined things would end, but I wasn't going to stop it. She made her choices, and now we were both living with the consequences. Camila stayed upstairs for hours, the sound of drawers opening and closing punctuated by the occasional thud of a suitcase being dragged. I stayed downstairs, pretending to read the same article on my phone over and over. In reality, I was replaying the past few days in my head, her lies, Eric's audacity, the look on her face when I told her she'd already left. Part of me thought I'd feel some satisfaction watching her pack. Maybe even a twisted sense of justice. But as the minutes dragged on, all I felt was the weight of it all. Eventually she came down, carrying 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy from crying. She looked at me, hesitating for a moment. "I'm going to my mom's," she said softly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I'll call you about the rest of my things," she added. Take whatever you need, I said, my tone flat. I don't care about the stuff. Her lips quivered, but she didn't cry. Instead, she set the bags down by the door and took a step closer to me. Max, Don't, I cut her off, standing up. Don't try to apologize again. It doesn't change anything. She froze, then nodded slowly. I know. But I need you to know that I did love you. I still do. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You have a funny way of showing it. Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. I'll go. I watched as she struggled to haul her bags out to her car, a small part of me tempted to help her. But I didn't. She threw one last glance at me before getting into the driver's seat, her eyes pleading for something, understanding, forgiveness I didn't know. The engine roared to life, and just like that she was gone. The silence in the house after she left was deafening. For years, this place had been filled with the sounds of our life together. Her humming while she cooked, the clatter of her heels on the floor, our late-night talks in bed. Now all that was gone, replaced by an emptiness I wasn't sure how to handle. I walked through the rooms, half expecting to see her in the kitchen or curled up on the couch. But every space felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. In our bedroom, her side of the closet was half empty, her favorite perfume still lingering in the air. I found myself standing there for far too long, staring at the empty hangers like they held all the answers. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat at the kitchen table, the divorce papers spread out in front of me. I stared at them, the words blurring together. This wasn't the life I had envisioned when I stood at the altar with her 20 years ago. I thought about calling someone, Anna maybe, but what would I say? That my wife had left. That I wasn't sure if I was relieved or heartbroken. No, this was something I had to process alone. The phone buzzed. A text from Karen. Max, just checking in. Let me know if you need anything. I stared at it for a moment before replying. She's gone. Let's keep moving forward. I knew the next steps wouldn't be easy, splitting assets, the inevitable conversations with friends and family, facing a future I never planned for. But for the first time in days I felt a small flicker of hope. Camila was gone, and while that chapter of my life was over, maybe, just maybe, a new one could begin. The first few days after Camila left were disorienting. The house felt too big, too quiet. I didn't realize how much space two people filled until half of that presence was gone. It wasn't just her physical absence. It was the void left by her laughter, her music playing in the kitchen, even the way she'd sigh when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I found myself avoiding certain rooms. The bedroom was the worst. Her empty dresser drawers felt like an accusation, and every glance at the bed reminded me of the betrayal I couldn't unsee. I ended up sleeping in the guest room, where the bed was smaller and the memories less suffocating. But the hardest part wasn't the silence, it was the echoes of everything I thought we had. Little things would catch me off guard. The mug she always used for coffee, her scarf still hanging on the coat rack, the half-empty bottle of her favorite perfume in the bathroom. Each one was a punch to the gut, a reminder that the life we built together was now rubble. A few nights later, I finally worked up the nerve to go through her things. Not out of spite, but because I needed to reclaim the space. I started with the bathroom, clearing out her makeup and hair products, the small bottles of expensive lotions she'd insisted on buying. Each item I tossed into the trash felt like shedding another layer of the past. When I got to the bedroom, I hesitated. Her jewelry box sat on the dresser, untouched. I opened it carefully, half expecting to find something incriminating. Instead, there were the usual trinkets, earrings I'd bought her for anniversaries, a necklace she wore on our wedding day. I closed the lid, unable to look at it any longer. Her closet was next. Most of her clothes were gone, but a few stray items remained. A sweater she always wore on rainy days, a pair of shoes she swore were her lucky ones. I packed them into a box, unsure of what to do with them. That's when I found it. At the back of the closet, tucked under a stack of old scarves, was a shoebox. Inside were letters, notes and cards we'd exchanged over the years. Some were from birthdays and anniversaries, others just small reminders of how much we meant to each other. Reading them felt like tearing open an old wound. There was a card she'd written on our 15th anniversary, thanking me for being her rock, for always putting her first. Another note from when we were dating, full of excitement about our future. Max, I love you more than anything. I can't wait to build a life with you. The words felt like a cruel joke now, a relic of a woman I no longer recognized. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor of the closet, surrounded by pieces of a life I thought was unshakable. The anger that had been driving me these past weeks started to give way to something deeper, grief. Grief for the years I couldn't get back. Grief for the trust she shattered. Grief for the man I used to be, the one who believed in forever. But as the hours passed, that grief began to shift. It wasn't a clean break, more like the first cracks in a wall. Beneath the pain, there was a faint glimmer of something else. Acceptance. Camila's choices weren't my fault. Her betrayal didn't define my worth. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide what came next. By the time the sun rose, I'd made a decision. The letters went back in the box, but not the trash. I wasn't ready to burn the past. It was part of me no matter how much it hurt. But I wouldn't let it anchor me anymore. I sealed the box, shoved it into the back of the closet, and stood up. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. Camila was gone, and while the memories of her still haunted the house, they didn't have to haunt me. It was time to start reclaiming my life. The first week alone was surreal. Every morning, I woke up expecting to hear Camila moving around downstairs or see her car in the driveway. Instead, the house greeted me with silence, a stark reminder of how much had changed. I threw myself into a routine hoping it would help. Mornings were for running, something I hadn't done in years. I'd lace up my sneakers and hit the pavement, the rhythmic pounding of my feet giving me a focus I desperately needed. The air was cold, biting at my skin, but I welcomed it. It cleared my mind, gave me a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic. Afterward, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out at the backyard. The garden Camila had once obsessed over was overgrown now, weeds creeping in where her tulips used to bloom. It felt like a metaphor I didn't want to unpack. Work became my other distraction. I wasn't tied to the pharmaceutical company anymore, but I still had meetings and calls related to the deal. Karen checked in regularly, keeping me updated on the divorce proceedings. She was efficient and no nonsense, which I appreciated. "Max, we're in a good position," she said during one call. "The evidence you provided is solid, and with the assets frozen, there's not much she can do to complicate things." "Good," I replied, my voice steady. "Let's keep it that way." Karen paused. "How are you holding up?" I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I'm fine," I said eventually. "Just taking it one day at a time." "That's all you can do," she said. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to call." I thanked her and hung up, the weight of her words lingering. One day at a time, it sounded so simple, but some days it felt like an impossible climb. The hardest part wasn't the logistics of the divorce or the loneliness of an empty house. It was the moments in between when my mind wandered to the what-ifs. What if I had noticed the signs earlier? What if I had fought harder to connect with Camila? What if I had been different? But I knew those thoughts wouldn't change anything. Camila made her choices, and now I had to live with mine. One evening, I finally tackled the backyard. I grabbed a pair of gloves and a rake and started clearing the weeds that had overtaken the flower beds. It was mindless work, but there was something therapeutic about it, watching the chaos give way to order little by little. As I worked, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, called out from her porch. She was in her late 60s, the kind of person who knew everyone's business but wasn't unkind about it. "Max, honey, you're out there working late," she said, her voice carrying across the fence. "Just trying to keep busy," I replied, wiping sweat from my brow. She nodded knowingly. "That's good. Busy hands keep a clear mind." I wasn't sure I believed that, but I smiled anyway. "How have you been?" I asked, more out of politeness than curiosity. "Oh, same as always," she said, leaning on the railing. "But I've been meaning to say, I'm sorry about what you're going through. Camila, well, let's just say she didn't do right by you." Her words caught me off guard. "Thanks," I said quietly, unsure of how to respond. "You're a good man, Max," she added. "Don't let this break you." I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. Mrs. Jenkins had always been nosy, but in that moment her words felt genuine. I returned to my work, her voice echoing in my mind. By the time I finished, the sun had set, and the yard looked better than it had in months. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Inside, I made a simple dinner and sat at the table alone, the quiet pressing down on me. 4 years, Camila and I had shared meals here, talking about our days, making plans for the future. Now it was just me. I thought about calling Anna, but I didn't want to burden her. Instead, I picked up my phone and scrolled aimlessly through social media, hoping for some distraction. That's when I saw it, Camila's profile. Her most recent post was from months ago, a picture of us on vacation, smiling like everything was perfect. I clicked on it, the caption jumping out at me, "My everything." It felt like a punch to the gut. How could she write something like that while sneaking around with Eric? How could she lie so easily? I closed the app and set my phone down, my appetite gone. The anger I'd been holding at bay surged back, filling the empty spaces the grief had left behind. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The guest room felt unfamiliar, but it was better than facing the memories in the master bedroom. My mind raced, replaying everything over and over. I thought about the future, what it would look like without her. The house, the holidays, the friends we shared. Everything was about to change. But as the night dragged on, a new thought emerged. Maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. For the first time since this all began, I allowed myself to imagine a future without Camila. A future where I wasn't defined by her betrayal. It was a small glimmer of hope, but it was enough to help me fall asleep. Tomorrow I'd start again. One day at a time. The next morning I woke up feeling lighter. Not free, there was still too much weight in my chest for that, but lighter. The yard work from the night before had given me a small sense of accomplishment, and I figured I'd ride that momentum into the day. I started with small things. Clearing out more of Camila's lingering items, reorganizing the living room, and even fixing the leaky faucet she'd been nagging me about for months. Each task felt like reclaiming a piece of my life, no matter how small. After lunch I decided to reach out to Anna. She picked up on the second ring. "Max, how are you?" she asked, her voice warm but cautious. "I'm managing," I said honestly. "Just figured it's been a while and I could use a friendly voice." "Of course," she said. "I'm glad you called. I've been worried about you." We talked for a while, mostly about normal things, her kids, work, a family gathering she'd just been to. She avoided bringing up Camila until I did. "She's at her mom's now," I said. "We haven't talked since she left." Anna sighed. "That's probably for the best. Have you thought about? I don't know what you want next. For yourself?" I paused, unsure of how to answer. "I guess I'm still figuring that out. It's hard to see past all this right now." "That's okay," she said gently. "Take your time. But don't forget that there's more to your life than this. You deserve to be happy, Mac." Her words stuck with me the rest of the day. Happiness. It felt so far away, like something that belonged to someone else. But the idea that I might find it again someday, that I might rebuild, planted a small seed of hope. Later, I went for another run, letting my feet carry me down unfamiliar streets. The physical exertion helped clear my mind, and for the first time in weeks I found myself focusing on the moment rather than the past. The crisp air filled my lungs, and the steady rhythm of my steps felt grounding. When I got home I showered and made dinner. It wasn't anything special, just a simple stir-fry, but I sat down at the table and ate it slowly, savoring the peace of a quiet evening. That night I decided to tackle something I'd been avoiding, going through old photos. I pulled out a shoebox filled with pictures from our life together, vacations, holidays, random snapshots of everyday moments. At first it was painful, like reopening a wound that hadn't healed. There was a photo of us in Italy, her arm wrapped around me as we stood in front of the Colosseum. Another of her blowing out candles on her birthday cake, laughing as I leaned in to kiss her cheek. But as I kept going, the pain began to shift. The photos reminded me of the good times, the love we once had. It wasn't all lies. For years we were happy. By the time I reached the bottom of the box, I wasn't angry anymore. Just sad. Sad for what we'd lost, for the life we could have had if things had been different. I set the box aside, deciding to keep the photos for now. Maybe someday I'd be ready to let them go, but tonight wasn't that night. Before bed, I sat on the couch with a notebook and a pen, something I hadn't done in years. I started writing down small goals, not life-changing things, just steps to move forward. Finish fixing the house. Find a new hobby. Call an old friend. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I climbed into bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, a tiny flicker of hope. It was fragile, but it was there. Tomorrow was another day, and maybe, just maybe, it would be a little easier than today. A month passed before I realized I'd stopped counting the days since Camila left. At first, every sunrise felt like a mile marker on a never-ending road, but over time, the days blurred together in a way that felt manageable. I wasn't over it, not by a long shot, but the pain that once consumed me had started to ease into something quieter, more bearable. I spent my mornings running, my afternoons tackling small projects around the house, and my evenings reconnecting with people I'd unintentionally distanced myself from. Anna had been a lifeline, always ready with a kind word or a reality check when I needed it. But I'd also reached out to friends I hadn't talked to in years, guys I used to grab beers with, coworkers who had drifted away over time. One Friday I decided to visit the lake where Camila and I used to go for picnics. It had been years since I'd been there, and part of me wasn't sure if I was ready to face the memories it would stir up. But something about the idea felt important, like a step I needed to take. The drive was quiet, the winding road lined with autumn trees shedding their leaves. When I arrived, the lake was almost empty, the crisp air keeping most people away. I found a bench overlooking the water and sat down, pulling my jacket tighter against the chill. At first, the memories came flooding back. The way Camila used to laugh as she skipped stones across the water, the time we got caught in the rain and ended up huddling under a tree laughing like kids. It hurt, but it didn't crush me the way I'd expected. Instead, I found myself thinking about what the lake meant to me separate from her. It was peaceful, a place where the noise in my head seemed to quiet for a while. I sat there for what felt like hours, letting the stillness of the water wash over me. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and pink, I realized something. I wasn't stuck in the past anymore. The memories were still there, but they didn't hold me captive. That evening back at home, I got a call from Karen. "Good news," she said, her tone brisk but warm. "Camila signed the settlement. The divorce is officially moving forward without any disputes." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "That's good to hear," I said, leaning back in my chair. "She didn't contest anything," Karen continued. "I think she knows it's over." "Yeah," I said softly. "I guess she does." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a while, processing the news. It wasn't relief exactly, more like closure. The chapter was ending and I was ready to turn the page. In the weeks that followed, I started focusing on myself in a way I hadn't in years. I joined a local photography group, something I'd always been curious about but never had time for. I took weekend hikes, exploring trails I hadn't visited since I was a kid. And then there was Rachel. We met at a bookstore of all places. I was flipping through a book about landscape photography when she asked me if I'd ever tried taking photos at the state park nearby. Her voice was warm, her smile easy, and we ended up talking for nearly an hour. She wasn't anything like Camila, and that was part of what drew me to her. She was down to earth, quick to laugh, and had this way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we texted back and forth before finally meeting for coffee. It was simple, low pressure, and exactly what I needed. One night, after Rachel and I had been seeing each other for a few months, we sat on my couch, sharing a bottle of wine. She glanced at the stack of framed photos on the floor, pictures of my old life I hadn't figured out what to do with yet. "You don't have to talk about it," she said gently, "but if you want to, I'm here." I hesitated, then nodded. "It's a long story," I said, swirling my wine. "I've got time," she said with a small smile. And so, I told her. Not everything, some wounds were still too fresh, but enough for her to understand. She listened without interrupting, her expression soft and understanding. When I finished, she reached over and took my hand. "You've been through a lot," she said simply. "But you're still here. That says something." Her words settled over me like a blanket, warm and comforting. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe things would be okay. The next morning, I stood by the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The house still felt too big sometimes, the quiet still unnerving. But there was also a sense of possibility in the air, a feeling that the future wasn't as bleak as I once thought. I thought about Camila, not with anger or sadness but with acceptance. She was part of my story, but she didn't define it. The rest of my life was waiting, and for the first time in months I felt ready to embrace it. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine. And that was enough.